Howdy YouTube, welcome to 2015 and another year of miscellaneous Matt. At the end of 2014, I promised you more Harbor Freight goodness early in January. Doesn't get much earlier in January than this. Today is New Year's Day, so I took advantage of the annual 25% off one item coupon that they send out every year, and I went and I bought myself this bad boy. This is a drill press, I hope. This is a pretty smashed cardboard box. I got this at a just about brand spanking new Harbor Freight store. I was hoping that it wouldn't have been moved around too many times, but the bottom line is that this is 200 pounds of steel and iron in a cardboard and foam box, and the packaging frankly just isn't up to the task. We'll get it out of the box, we'll get it all assembled, we'll stand it up with the help of either friends or a front end loader, and then we'll put it through its paces. Check the run out, check the strength, check the vibration, just kind of see if this thing is worth what amounts to top dollar at a Harbor Freight store. Alrighty, well, first things first, let's get these straps off of here. They frankly have done most of the damage to this box. And it's already pretty obvious that the head of the drill press is down here in the box because the thing's horribly lopsided. We have, looks like some handles, miscellaneous parts, bolts. This is the crank for the table. This is the, by all accounts, useless oiler bottle. In fact, I'm gonna set this aside because I don't think I'm even gonna put that on. One chuck. Harbor Freight, folks, what are you gonna do? And one giant piece of foam. Alrighty, there's the table and the base. An 800-pound column. No two ways about it, YouTube. This thing is, fill in the blank, heavy, 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 heavy. There are 4 big pieces in the box: the base, the post, the table, and the head. And each one you pull out is heavier than the last. Just when you think that the table was what was making the box heavy, you go and try to muscle this thing out. I set it actually on a furniture dolly because I'm still not 100% sure how exactly I'm going to put this thing together, and at least now the giant piece is on wheels. 2 things I'm noticing right off the bat. Number 1, this didn't even come with a manual. Given the quality of Harbor Freight's manuals, I'm frankly not that distressed by this omission. It's available online. I'll probably go and download it and take a look at it just for grins, but let's be honest, Harbor Freight manuals are apparently not great in Chinese, and then they're poorly translated to other languages. So your mileage may vary, but it won't be good in terms of getting anything useful out of a manual. The other thing that I'm noticing is that each and every piece of this thing, particularly anything that's cast iron, is coated in who knows what. Some sort of grease, oil, Burma shave, I don't know what it is, but it's some weird combination of slippery and sticky, and it's got to go. So what I'm gonna do is take all the plastic off of this stuff, and I'm gonna don the gloves and get a couple of rags and pick a solvent, hoping that either alcohol or mineral spirits will take this off. If not, you know, I'll have to resort to either acetone or gasoline or something like that to get rid of it. But anyway, when you see this thing next, it'll be all cleaned up and we'll be ready to start putting it together. Okay, bright, shiny, clean pieces. Only took me 2 hours of scrubbing to get all of the grease off of these things. Mineral spirits turns out to be a good solvent for this. The alcohol doesn't touch it. I didn't really think it would. The other thing you might notice is that a lot of my shiny surfaces are dull at this point. That's because once I got the protective grease off of them, I put a coat of paste wax on top to protect it, because obviously I don't want the cast iron surfaces rusting. At some point I will probably go back and buff that out to a nice shine, but at the moment I just want to get it together. Hardware to assemble the post to the base consists solely of 4 bolts. I'm going to run these things through the holes before I set the column on here, because I want to make sure that they're all nice and clean. I don't want to get anything cross-threaded once I have the column on there. And then I'll go ahead and put them on. I'm going to snug them up with the ratchet, which, by the way, because this is an import, be prepared to work in metric. It's an 18mm socket for anyone who cares. Okay, now I'm sure all of my bolts are going to go in there nice and cleanly. Eventually, I'm going to put some of this. This is the red, the invincible thread locker. But I'm not going to do it now, because I've yet to hit the switch on the motor for this thing. And God forbid, if I have to take it apart and take it back, I don't want to have to bust through this. So we'll do that one bolt at a time once we're sure everything is copacetic. There's not really a right and wrong for which one of these holes on the column lines up with which hole on the base, because the track for moving the table is adjustable. This collar loosens with an Allen key. Likewise down here, the whole thing rotates. And so we'll be able to get this exactly on the side or wherever we like the crank handle for the table once it's on the base. Okay, again, not really cranked down tight. I'm gonna wait to do that until I'm sure everything is cool and I've got the Loctite on there. I don't expect that this metal is super hard, and I don't wanna run the risk of stripping the threads in the base of this thing, because I don't feel like tapping them out and putting bigger hardware in. I have this whole mess laying on its side because in their infinite wisdom, Harbor Freight has made this as hard as they possibly could. If they had simply geared this thing the whole way to one end or the other, you would be able to slip the table over the column and then crank this down into place. You'd be all good to go. They didn't do that. They left space at either end where you have no range of motion through the gears. And what that means is that this thing has to be in here and engaged in the teeth of that gear while you put it over the column. Yeah, good times, I know. But it is what it is. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set this thing on top of here, and it does have an up and a down. At the bottom end of this thing, there's only a very little short piece of space where there's no teeth, and the top is the one that has 6 inches or something like that, where it doesn't really do anything. So I'm gonna set that up there. I've got the column propped up just high enough that I can work the table. And what I'm gonna do is, I don't know, try and get this thing on here. Okay. We stand the table up. I make sure that the teeth are good and engaged in there. Cranking seems to work. And we slide her home. It goes all the way down till the bottom of the track engages in the column. I'm going to go ahead and slide the collar back in place. Now, there's more of an art than a science to this. The table is supposed to be able to swing 360 degrees around the column. That's why this track is not affixed any better than a groove at the bottom and a groove in this collar at the top. So the top collar has to be obviously far enough down the column and tight enough that your track operates reliably. By the same token, it's supposed to allow this whole gizmo to slide around. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just put it on here, tighten it, you know, not too tight so I can move it around a couple of times and not worry that I'm leaving a bunch of divots in the column. We'll sort out the tension on the adjustment track once the whole thing is upright. Home stretch, folks. There are 4 good-sized set screws, 2 on either side of the head of the drill press, secured with this Allen key, which are what keep it from twisting on the column. You don't have to worry, I don't think, too much about the whole thing popping off. Even though you were using a lever to exert downward pressure, the angles are wrong. It would pinch on the column before it would shoot off. Not to mention that this thing is a beast. It weighs at least 100 pounds. So the set screws, I think, are more than adequate for keeping this attached to the column. However, you have to get it on the column before you can do that. So obviously, step 1 is to make sure that all your set screws are loose, because you're gonna have enough trouble getting this thing onto here. I've got it I've got it close as I can get it, really. It needs to go up, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches and slide onto the column. I put the table all the way down for 2 reasons. One, it just gives me more working room in and around here without running into it. But mostly, when I go to stand this thing up, drill presses are just inherently top heavy as it is. And the lower you have the table, the closer it gets to, being relatively stable. But first things first, let's get this monster on the post. Success! Unfortunately, my garage floor is not terribly flat, so I can't rest assured that this head is exactly parallel to the foot of the drill press, just because they're both essentially laying pretty flat on the ground. But it's going to be close. So rather than risk something awful happening while I stand this up, I'm going to go ahead and set these set screws relatively tight. Probably not that they're final analysis. As with the bolts on the column, odds are I'll come back and I'll put a little bit of Loctite on here. But for right now, I think we're going to call this good. Moment of truth, YouTube. Got to figure out how to stand this thing up. I've got a couple of options. One, I could just try muscling it up. Might work. I really only have to tilt it and I'd have, my legs underneath me. Might be okay. Plan B is to use the front end loader on the tractor, put some straps around this and get it most of the way up. That's going to be a hassle inside the garage, but in the end, it's probably the safe thing to do. All right, I have this bad boy slid into position, plus or minus. Before we can turn it on and just make sure the motor works, we need to tighten up the belts. They come from the factory, obviously loose, so they don't get all stretched out. This particular model is a 12-speed press. There are 4 pulleys on each one of the spindles, the motor, the slave spindle, and the drive spindle for the chuck down here. This is one of the places where the Harbor Freight version of this drill press varies slightly from the one they sell at Grizzly. If you look, essentially this exact same press is sold both at Harbor Freight and on Grizzly.com. There are just some real minor differences when you get to the head, and the speed arrangement is one of those. On the Grizzly press, it's also 12 speeds, but it has a minimum speed setting of, I think, 220. And I don't remember what the maximum is, but the bottom line is that the Harbor Freight press actually has a wider range. It has a lowest speed of 180 RPMs, which is ridiculous. I love it. And it goes all the way up to 3865, which I don't expect I'm ever going to use. The trade-off for this is that you don't get quite the granularity in between the speeds that you get with a different pulley arrangement. So for instance, this thing has an arrangement, which it actually is set up for right now, of 570 RPM. The next step up is 1180. There's nothing in between 570 and 1180. I would really like to have had an 800 RPM option, but it just isn't there. For now, what I'm going to do is just verify that these belts are where I want them. We'll start at 570 RPM. Sounds good to me. At some point, I need to put the handle on here. But the tightening arrangement is pretty nice. There's a lever here that slides the motor back. So you just, put whatever's the right tension on it. If anybody knows how you're supposed to know what the right tension is, let me know. And you tighten the thumb screw and voila. One Titan motor. Obviously still have some assembly to do. I've got to put the arms on here so we can actually use it as a drill press. I've got to put the chuck in place, but I'm dying to know what I'm going to get when I flip the switch. So cross your fingers, YouTube. It works. That's the most important thing. Little bit of vibration, I kind of expect that. I need to check and make sure that all those pulleys are exactly coplanar. My guess is they're not. And those belts, have been sitting in the same position since this was manufactured. We'll have to see if they loosen up or if they're going to have to be replaced with either some link belts or at least something that's a step up. But it goes around. It would drill a hole if it had a chuck on it and some arms. So let's do that. The good news and bad here, YouTube. The good news is the kind folks at Harbor Freight were nice enough to leave flattened sides on here. So I'm going to be able to get a wrench on these and get them nice and tight so that they don't come loose once they're installed. The bad news is that there is enough grease in this hole to pretty much recoat all of the cast iron parts. I can't, for the life of me, imagine what all of that is for, but I'm going to be spending some quality time here with my favorite disposable screwdriver and a rag and the mineral spirits before we can actually get the handles in. And again, remember that we are in metric land. Turns out to be 10 millimeters across these two flat spots. There's a simple number 2 Phillips screw on the back of this. Our last stop here is to install the chuck. The chuck just presses on to a tapered spindle. This is one of the other places where this drill press differs slightly from the one they sell at Grizzly. The taper is a little bit different on this one. This one does not have quite as large of a spindle. Here's the spindle adapter for this particular drill press. This is what's known as a Morse taper that goes up into the press. And on this press, it's a Morse taper number 3. On the Grizzly version of this, it's a Morse taper number 4, which is bigger. And so apparently on the Grizzly version, they have ordered a more robust spindle assembly in here. But quite frankly, this thing is pretty huge as it is. I don't expect it's going to be a problem. On the other end that adapts to the chuck, this is what's known as a Jacobs taper. And on this press, it's a Jacob taper number 3. You can buy replacements of these. Now, if I find out, for instance, that I need a chuck that goes smaller than this one, I can buy another one of these with a different taper on the bottom of it, so that I can mount either a larger or a smaller chuck onto this press. Or for that matter, if I find out that, you know, this thing is not exactly straight, if it's causing me to have some run out, or the chuck is causing run out, they can be replaced with upgraded versions that will give you some higher precision without having to replace the whole drill press. All right, just give that a shove up in there. A light whack with the mallet. And then the chuck will actually hold itself in place. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the press. To seat it. All righty. We are ready to make some holes. It's a good idea to put a little pressure on all three of the holes. There's a lot of debate as to whether that's really necessary, but why not? Definitely going to have to find some place to attach this because I know it's going to vanish. Anywho, let's set our depth stop over here for, I don't know, what do you think? Half an inch? That work for you? Let's drill our first hole. Let's go an inch. Like butter, like butter. Love it. There you have it, YouTube. One 20-inch, 1.5 horse drill press. Thank you, Harbor Freight. Thank you, 25% off coupon. This is what I would consider the starting point. We got it out of the box, we got it assembled, it works, it makes holes. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna start really tweaking this thing. I wanna make sure that I get it all aligned the way it ought to be. I'm gonna check those pulleys, check the belts, get rid of as much vibration as possible. I wanna see just how good of a press we can make this. It's obviously very heavy duty, it's got a nice motor. There's no reason this can't be a first-class piece of machinery. But that is a project for another day. For right now, I'm gonna make some more of these just because I can. Stay safe, YouTube.